Hello, everybody, and welcome inside upon further review for another Wednesday during the high school football season here in Northeast Indiana. My name is Eric Dutkiewicz, better known as Doot, alongside the coach Shannon Griffith. We're coming to you again this week, following week 2, leading into week 3. 10 games on the schedule a week ago. We shortened that up to 5 this upcoming week, so a lot to talk about tonight. Coach, great to see you. I know you were out at the big one at Carroll on Friday night with Warren Central, and another really fun night of high school football across the area.
Yeah, it was another good night of football. We had I call it a little bit of a sloppy game against with Carroll and Warren Central. But other than Carroll finds a way to win. And if I'm looking like I'm from a destination unknown, it's because I am. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina for my day job. And hopefully I'm get back because there's a potential that hurricane that's brewing down in the Gulf of Mexico could be over this potential area here come Thursday when I'm supposed to fly back. So hopefully it's either I'm flying or I'm driving, one way or the other. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But
yeah,
the Carroll Warren Central game, a couple things from my perspective on this. Carroll found a way to win. Had they not gotten the 2 turnovers that they've got, one on the 11 and one on the 20 of Warren Central, I'm not sure they win that ball game because Warren Central really dominated the line of scrimmage for the most part. Now, and that hurt Jimmy at times because of the pressure that they were getting from their outside edge players was pretty intense all night long. They had trouble blocking those guys, but good teams find ways to win, and they got the win. I don't think they'll say it was a pretty win, but it doesn't matter overall because a win's a win is a win. I've been a part of a lot of ugly wins, but I wasn't disappointed because we won. That's for sure. But Carroll does have some things that they have to work on, and with the offensive line and the graduation that they have seen through their offensive line, you can tell that's a work in progress for them. Their running game at times showed some bits and pieces of being the running game that we were accustomed to seeing a year ago. But Warren Central had a good defensive line. Their front 7 was real good. Their 2 end rushers were unbelievable. And overall, good night. Another great night for high school football in the area. Weather was great. And it looks so far this week, it's going to be another nice week of Friday night weather.
Yeah, certainly. Looking at the Carroll Chargers, Jimmy Sullivan, 16 for 41, 174 yards and 2 passing touchdowns. Notable, Jimmy has thrown 81 attempts in the first 2 games. I mean, does that seem like a high volume for you, Coach, for a high school kid? I mean, that seems like a lot to me.
Well, that goes to show you that they're not getting a running game. And you can even see by his percentage as a passer is down a lot as well because it's been tough sledding up front, being able to protect. And unfortunately, without having a consistent running game, they've had to throw the football at times because that is Jimmy's strength. And unfortunately, they've battled 2 top-notch defenses back-to-back weeks, Hamilton Southeastern and Warren Central. So that's their biggest thing. They've got to get a run game established. They'll have an opportunity to do it this week because I think that's the one glaring weakness offensively from that perspective. I thought their defense played good. We know that their defense can be a good defense because of the people they got back there. Ultimately, if they can find a running game with Starks and Steely and whatever they need to do there, they can still be a really good team. And they're 1-1, so always good to work on problems when you get a victory. It's a lot hard. It would have been a lot tougher coming out of that game 0-2, heading into a game like Southside, where you're uncertain about who you are or what you are.
Yeah, definitely. 92 yards for Nate Starks out of the backfield. And another thing we talked about, Coach, too, was the turnover aspect. A week ago, Carroll loses to Hamilton Southeastern. Defense does not force any turnovers.
Right.
Tonight, they forced 3. So a big win for them for that defensive unit to set themselves up to get in that perspective of rallying from that 14-6 first half deficit.
Right.
And they were able to turn the tides in that respect down the stretch.
The one turnover that gave them the ball at the 11 was on a punt. Now, their punting game Friday night was unbelievable. The punt, their coverage, their kicks, everything was A+. That was one of the bright spots, I think, out of that game, was watching their special teams, especially their punt team. But they got the turnover on the 11 on the special teams, and I think the other one was a fumble recovery via defense. So, and those two plays, those 2 turnovers led to points. And I've always said, when you turn the ball over in special teams, it's tough to win. It's tough to win when you're doing things on special teams that ultimately cost you games, and that's what I think hurt Warren Central, was that component there.
Yeah, so Carroll gets the 18-14 victory at home. They now sit at 1-1. Warren Central, 261 yards of offense on the ground there, and they take the loss. They are now 0-2 on the season. And Coach, I think it's an interesting dynamic, like we've been talking about all along with this new schedule, to see those Fort Wayne teams and Indianapolis teams, because then you can really see where some of these teams are very early on.
Right.
And I think Carroll showed that, they could hang with Hamilton Southeastern for a while, ultimately took the loss, but then they were able to battle through and beat a very good Warren Central team, a historic traditional power in the state of Indiana. And now as those, they enter conference play, I think they have a better idea of who they are as a team and really what they need to work on.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the component about having 2 non-conference games, is that you get a chance to really figure out what you are and who you are. You want to come out of those 2 games and have an identity. When you're struggling to establish an identity, especially offensively, that could be concerning from the standpoint, you're spending time now worrying about what can you hang your hat on. And I think for some schools, they're going to have to answer some of those questions. A lot of times these games enable for them to get down their bench and get kids some opportunities for game-like repetition. So when they head into the season like they're approaching now, where every game is critical, they've kind of been through the test of the wars and so forth. So no question, I think these 2 non-conference games help teams in a lot of ways, and I understand why coaches wanted it from the standpoint, instead of going right into the conference component. But I think it gives them an idea of who they are, what they are. They played some really good competition. And I think that's going to bode well for a lot of these teams moving forward as they get into the conference fray.
Sure. And a couple of minutes here coming up Upon Further Review, we'll be joined by Brett Rump, the voice of high school football on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM, who also sits in the booth with Shannon on Friday nights, and he'll get his thoughts on Friday's matchup between Carroll and Warren Central and a lot of the other games in the area. And Coach, we had a full slate of games. We talked about it off the top. I think it was actually technically 9 games because 2 of the SAC teams were playing each other, even though it was a non-conference game. But really good games across the area, really big matchups. I think probably another one that kind of perked up in the last week was that Snyder East Noble matchup up in Kindleville, with the impressive showing that Snyder had in week 1, also beating Warren Central. East Noble rolls easily over Bishop Lures, and that set up a showdown up in Kindleville with Snyder pulling away late and really showing why they are the number 1 team in Class 5A right now.
Yeah, I thought Snyder, they had 448 of total yards of offense. Billingsley had 96 yards through the year. He was 10 of 14. Again, another consistent and accurate performance by Billingsley. as well. And he also added 31 yards on the ground. So from that standpoint, I think they're getting good productivity out of him thus far. What do you think about Buchanan? Buchanan has 20 touches for 282 yards, three touchdowns. We know what that kid brings to the table. He's going to be a force in conference play when we get started here, because of his ability to be a game changer. Defensively, East Noble did quite well. They moved the ball on Snyder. They had almost 200 yards passing and almost 200 yards rushing. And like I said, Snyder's a team that runs to run the football. They had 350 rush yards and almost 100 yards passing. But what they like to do is run those play action passes. And when their running game is as good as it's been the last 2 weeks, that makes their play action passing game that more lethal in that regard. So they had a score for a touchdown on defense, pick six. Hauser had that one. And they cut down on their penalties this week. They only had 3 penalties for 30 yards. I think against Warren Central, they had 80 yards of penalties. So those are things that doing well. And this is an interesting concept that I thought from the stats, dude. Snyder only had 50 offensive plays.
Oh, yeah.
And East Noble had 80.
Yeah.
So they had 30 more touches as opposed to Snyder's, but that just tells you how much Snyder was doing well. And their third down conversion, they were 2 of 7 on third downs, 29%, which isn't very good at all. And I got to think that they missed some very short yardage opportunities in that. Now they were 2 for 2 on fourth down. In contrast to East Noble, they had almost 60% on third down. So, another great game by the Panthers. We're going to find out how legit they are as we get into the season here. But you got to be impressed with what they did to Warren Central, comparing that to what Carroll had to do with Warren Central, and they struggled. And then they go up to Kendallville against East Noble in their backyard and really control the game from start to finish.
Yeah, that defense looked really good, which I think we talked about early on this season, is the fact that you'll see the more traditional run game out of Snyder, 282 yards for Uriah Buchanan. Billingsley gets in the mix too. He's going to be a dual threat all year. But then it was that defense, relying on the defense. I think Brandon Logan, 8 tackles, and Will Kelso, 9 tackles on the line. And so that defense is stacked. And you mentioned Levi Overholzer. There was a Snyder parent who told me this offseason. He said, that's a kid to watch, the senior safety for the Snyder Panthers. And so far this year, 2 games, 2 interceptions. 1 he took back to the house for a pick 6. So, just a really vaunted defense there. And just one of those things where that will play huge for Snyder down the line is the ability to rely on your defense, because, oh, by the way, they only had the ball for 18 minutes. I mean, the possession, time of possession was 29 minutes to 18 in favor of East Noble. First downs, 24 for East Noble to 17 for Snyder. And then you mentioned it, total plays, almost a 2-to-1 scenario down there as well. So, but Snyder looked impressive there, and jumped out to a 21-7 halftime lead. And then the one thing, though, I think in the end, 21 points for East Noble in the fourth quarter. I assume that there probably at that point might have been a lot of maybe some second string guys in there for Snyder. But that's one of the things to watch too, is when you get your opportunity, don't mess it up in that regard, in the sense of, giving up 21 points in the fourth quarter. I know that, Xander likes to throw the ball around a lot, but that was one glaring thing for me at the end there.
Yes. And, we've got to bring in Rumpy here in a quick second here, but one thing that East Noble had trouble with was giving up the big play and Snyder scoring awful quickly. If you took everything off of Snyder and just looked at East Noble statistically, you thought, wow, they had a pretty good ball game, with where they were at run and pass wise. So probably a little mixed feeling there by Coach Amstutz coming out of that game from a statistical standpoint. They lost the game, but at times they showed, that their team is ready to go into the NE8 and compete.
Absolutely. Well, it is that time, like you mentioned, Coach. We're going to bring in our guest for the evening, joining us here from 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM, the voice of high school football in Northeast Indiana, Brett Rump, joining us. Rumpy, thanks for joining us. The tides have turned again. You're joining our show here.
Yeah, I know. It's always fun to jump in and kind of be almost the guinea pig here with you guys putting the wheel out in front of me and me having to do the running. It's a lot harder work when the pressure's on you as a guest.
That's right.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for joining us. And we started the show talking about the two big games from the the non-conference action in our first game with Carroll and Warren Central, and then Snyder East Noble. What overall were you? And we'll break down the Carroll for sure here in a sec. But just your overall impressions of what the first 2 weeks of that non-conference action. How significant was that for SHC teams?
Well, I think it's very important to get a gauge. I applaud the SAC coaches for their willingness to challenge all of their football teams. A lot of times you think, oh, it's a chance at 2 quick wins. We just got to find a couple teams out there that we can beat. But almost across the board, none of the coaches took that approach. They tried to figure out how to schedule to set the most difficult challenge to their football teams. As a result, the SAC took some losses. But like I've been saying, my hope is this schedule builds the quality of football in the SAC for future years. This isn't about week 1 and week 2. This is about 2025, 2026, 2027, because, we saw this, and I've brought this up before, with Carroll and Homestead jumping to the SAC from the NHC, that Carroll and Homestead got a little bit of a rude awakening. They found out things are bigger, faster, stronger in the SAC. And you either had to grow as a program to compete, or you would always be sitting there at 500 or somewhere in that vicinity. And I hope that's what our SAC teams learn, is that, hey, the whole season now has your conference, but it also has a measuring stick that's part of it. And this year didn't necessarily measure up. We'd like to see that record improve. There's a lot of red on there, and that's for SAC. We like our Christmas colors to be a little more evenly matched. But the bottom line is, I think the results of this schedule are 3-4 years out. That's when we'll start to see, what does it do to motivate some of our area schools to get better, to work harder in the off season, all of those things. And the other part of it is postseason success, which we haven't even had a chance to measure yet. For schools like Lures, for Concordia, some of the smaller schools, this is a chance for them to kind of class down from what they face in the SAC and maybe get a gauge. And Lures didn't necessarily do that. They played a couple of 4A schools, but for Concordia, they classed down and they took a couple of pretty good hits against their defense. So, that might teach them something for the future. But overall, I hope that it raises the bar for all of the programs in the conference, motivates kids year round to get better, so we don't see the type of record we saw this year.
Sure. And that game Friday night, Coach, and Brett, the Warren Central Carroll matchup, one that, we hadn't seen in this area. It was cool to have Warren Central come up. A big time atmosphere out there. And I think really ultimately Carroll in the end played up to that big time atmosphere, got the turnovers they needed, rallied from the second half, and were able to pull ahead and get that 18-14 victory. just what your thoughts from that game, Brett, as far as what you were there, you were calling it in the booth. Just what was it about that Carroll different from week 1 to week 2 that you think they were able to pull out that victory?
Well, I think the one thing is they had to learn how to win ugly, because that was kind of an ugly football game. I don't think either team played up to their standard. I thought Warren Central might have gotten beat up a little bit by Snyder. They didn't look like a real confident football team. And a lot of that is confidence not only with the play on the field, but confidence in what they wanted to do to attack Carroll defensively. I thought they had opportunities to run the football throughout the night, but they still tried to pass it. And Keith Jackson, their quarterback, he had some success, but not nearly enough to really be a threat to Carroll in their secondary. But overall, I thought that it was the team that figured it out, how they were going to attack the other team. And credit to Carroll's coaches, it came down to setting up 5 wide. As soon as they took Nate Starks out of the backfield, put him into a wing or a slot position, and they went with 5 wide receivers, they completely disrupted what Warren Central was doing defensively. They got a little bit of mojo and some momentum on their side on that drive. They put it in for a touchdown. And I just think that one simple decision by Carroll's offensive coaches was really the difference in the game. I think that's where the momentum swung. I think that's where, Carroll believed that they were going to win the football game. And I don't know if Warren Central ever recovered.
No, I think that was, we had talked about that during the broadcast, is that when they kind of on that one drive where they got the turnover, they kind of committed to that 5 wide. Now, most of the night, they were concerned with those edge rushers that were just giving them fits all night long. And I think they got to the point, says, well, let's take at least one guy out of the box. We'll man everything up and put it on Jimmy Sullivan's shoulders to get rid of the football in time and not take a bad sack, But I think one of the biggest concerns that I still have with Carroll at this point in time is their ineffectiveness on first and second down, mostly because of the running game. Now, part of that's because of who they played. You got to look at that too. It's not always going to be a 200, 300-yard game rushing. But when you contrast that what Snyder did to Warren Central, I was a little surprised that Carroll's running game didn't show a little bit better in that game. They only had 94 yards rushing, and I believe they had about 22 attempts on the ground. Of course, Starks had 17 total.
Well, Shannon, about that running game, I thought, first of all, Warren Central's 2 defensive ends were just monsters. Carroll had no answer for them. Their offensive line's going to have to get better. They just weren't good enough. And they seemed to always have pressure on Sullivan when he tried to drop back and pass, and they took away most of the running lanes through the first half, maybe even through most of the 3 quarters. But they also kind of wore down. I think they were using speed up front, and you keep going with that speed. You keep getting around the edge, and eventually you start to lose a little juice. And I think that kind of helped Carroll at the late part of the game, as they might have worn Warren Central down a little bit. But overall, my takeaway with Carroll is they've got 2 or 3 new faces, that offensive line.
Right.
They've got to get better. They got to protect the edge better. They can't let Sullivan get the type of pocket that he had, which was a collapsing pocket. He didn't look real comfortable early on. And, we already know, because we saw it last year, if you give him a clean pocket and time to throw, he will pick you apart, because he is very accurate. But when he's got guys around his ankles and, guys coming at him straight up the middle, he has trouble escaping. He also has trouble maintaining that accuracy. And then so If I'm Coach Dinan, one thing I'm really focused on is improved front line play, offensive line play. And I think with that, they'll be able to get more balance in the offense. Nate Starks isn't a big guy. And
Right.
so you've got to create a pretty good hole for him. Now, if you can get him through the initial line of scrimmage and get him into space, we saw what happened.
Right.
He out-sprinted everybody to the end zone and then dropped to a knee. But the point is, I think it all starts with their offensive line play. That will help to establish the running game.
Yeah, and the one thing that I think we all thought with Carroll this year is, defensively speaking, they were going to have a pretty darn good defense coming back, whether it would be their linebackers. Lentz had a heck of a ball game on Friday night.
Well, he wasn't even one of the guys we talked about, and yet he was the star. I mean, Cam Lentz was just out of his mind. He was in on almost every play, most of them seemingly in the Warren Central backfield.
Well, and he caused that one fumble that ultimately led to the touchdown. But defensively speaking, I think Carroll's defense is as good as advertised, I would say.
Yeah, I thought that Warren Central attacked them on the run, but I don't think you're going to see that from a lot of teams between now and the second or third week of postseason play. But when Warren Central went to that big back, he was able to get that 4 or 5 yards in a cloud of dust. Mick Moore was the kid. And so they did kind of, challenge him physically with that running game. I was just surprised they didn't stick with it. And I thought one of the big moments of the game was a critical 4th down call for Warren Central. And, they got a 4th and 2. They're sitting out around, I think it was 38-yard line or so.
Yeah.
5.5 minutes left. And they'd been running the football pretty effectively with that big sophomore running back. And I thought, hey, game might be on the line right here. And you got to be able to get 2 yards and a first down. And they punted the football. And I was kind of surprised because I thought their defense was showing signs of kind of wearing down a little bit. And they were out of sync a little bit defensively with Carroll changing things up. And the fact that they punted there it's not like they've got a boomer for a kicker either. I mean, a guy that kicks that rugby short kick. And I was very surprised they gave the ball back to Carroll with 5.5 minutes left. And I don't know if it would have changed the ball game, but I thought it certainly, to me, changed the scale and gave an advantage to the Chargers then over that last 5.5 minutes, because now they knew all they had to do was get a couple first downs.
Right.
And it was over.
Certainly. Well, and that, that now that kind of leads into, I guess, the question here for you, Brett. What's been the biggest surprise for you so far through week 2, the non-conference slate? We now move into week 3 with the conference games starting up. Is, even if it's maybe not even in the SAC, is there a surprise out there for you that you really, looking back these last 2 weeks, you just didn't see coming?
I think my biggest surprise is how dominant Snyder has been. Mm-hmm. I mean, that game, I don't think it was quite as close as the score might indicate against East Noble. I think Snyder had control of that game. I think East Noble's a much improved football team. And I take nothing away from East Noble because that's a team that took their lumps last year, got after it in the offseason, and they're better this year. There's no question. But, we thought that schedule going up into that environment in Kendallville, going on the road to Warren Central, back-to-back road games to start the season. You've got a new quarterback. You got, some new faces out there. I thought, hey, it might be a challenge. But the one thing Snyder has, they got a Snyder offensive line. And when they've got a Snyder offensive line, they're usually a pretty good football team. And so, but I was impressed with what they did offensively. And they've shown not only can they dominate on the ground, but they can put it in the air, when forced to. And so Kieron Billingsley, I thought, had a great couple of weeks. And, That's certainly one of the notable points at the beginning of the season here. And also, I'm anxious to see when you've got some of these matchups coming up, because you've had some games, a little bit of a mismatch. And the question is, were the teams that these two teams played, were they a little down, or are these teams up? But if you look around the area, that ACAC could be very interesting. Maybe not for the top spot, because AC is so good. And like I say, they're so good, they named the conference after them. But the point is, right behind Adams Central, you've got South Adams, you've got Heritage, you've got Bluffton. And don't sleep on Woodland. I still, even though Woodland got beat by Eastside, don't sleep on Woodland. But those other three, Bluffton, South Adams, and Heritage, they've been impressive so far. And maybe they've done it against competition that isn't at the level of what some other teams have played. But I think it's going to be fun to see those three teams all kind of battle it out and see who has their real shot, because you got to beat those three to get the shot at AC to win a conference. And so I think those three and what they've done so far, it sets the stage for a pretty exciting ACAC conference race.
Absolutely. And I think Kolkman out there at Heritage has done a tremendous job. I think they've got a team that may have the horses to finally wrangle Adams Central. Adams is always going to be a competitive team for what they do offensively, because that's they run it so well, and it's kind of poetry in motion when you watch it, and they do it year in and year out. Then you flip over to South Adams. They got the Warner kid at quarterback, which I think he can do a little bit of everything. So you're right. I think that's going to be a real exciting conference to keep an eye on as you go, kind of like the NE8 was a year ago. And I think the NE8 is going to come with a lot of that now, because, we've already got a top showdown coming up. You got DeKalb and New Haven this week, both 2-0. And probably not too many people would have probably said that either one would be 2-0 heading into this game.
Well, that's when you look around and you talk about some of those teams, the whole thing with the NE8, and I've said this before the season started, that you've got the NE8 and there may be 5 or 6 teams there that all feel this could be their shot. Columbia City, they won it last year. We thought they might come back a little bit to the pack. So far, it doesn't look like they're doing that. But Cherubusco and Plymouth is not the competition they're going to face when they've got Leo and East Noble on their schedule. So I think there's a lot of teams there that all think this could be their year to be this season's Columbia City. Norwell, I don't think they've got the horses, because they've been hit so hard with graduation. That was an outstanding class that graduated a year
Absolutely.
ago. And so, Norwell, I think, will be hovering, just trying to keep its head above water and stay around 500. But, how does New Haven fare when they get into the NE8 schedule? And, of course, the questions about teams like DeKalb. And we find out with that DeKalb New Haven matchup coming up this Friday, is DeKalb there yet? I think DeKalb's improved, but I'm not sure that they're there where they're going to compete for a championship. Hopefully this tape self-destructs if I'm proven wrong by the end of the year. But Leo, what did they take away from that week 1 loss to Kokomo? And I think East Noble's a really good team right now. From what I've seen, I think East Noble is probably my prohibitive favorite. But I'm very anxious to see what New Haven, because what's impressed me with New Haven has been their defense. I figured that offense has weapons, and there's going to be guys that make plays. But if they're going to hold teams to a touchdown or less, or somewhere in that, they're going to be really good. And so I think we'll find out a lot about New Haven this week, and of course moving forward. And look at that late season matchup, East Noble, New Haven, because that could be a lot of fun. I think it's week 8 or week 9 when we get that matchup. And things could come down to those two schools in the NE8, although Jason Dorfler and Leo are probably saying, oh, wait a minute, Rumpy, don't forget about us. But I think we're in store for a couple of really good conference races, both NE8 and ACAC. Right now, to me, the SAC looks like Snyder's got the advantage. Carroll's going to be right there. But beyond that, I'm not sure there's anyone else that we feel. I mean, you look at Dwenger, they played really tough competition, but those two games were not even competitive. You look at Homestead, young team, new quarterback. I don't know how deep the SAC goes. Now you've got the divisions, which changes things. But still, I think the fun races are going to be what happens in that NE8 and ACAC.
Absolutely. Well, we'll certainly be watching that. And Brett, we got to run and move on, but we appreciate you joining us tonight to look at the first 2 weeks of the season and then start to look ahead as we enter conference play for the SAC and moving down the line. And we'll see you Friday night for the 1380 game of the week.
I appreciate it, guys. Have a good night.
Thank you so much. Brett Rump, the voice of high school football in Northeast Indiana from 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM. Joining us, you can listen to him every weekday 4 to 6 on the Sports Rush. And, of course, he calls the games with Shannon on Friday night up in the booth. And we do the pregame show from starting at 6, leading up to kickoff at 7. We're back to 7 o'clock kickoffs again this week, Coach. So show up, we'll be good. So
that was good because this week I remember Rump had to hurry up to get the Pizza Hut because they kind of end around that 11 o'clock hour. Yeah. Well, the game at Carroll didn't end till like 10:30, 10:40, somewhere around there. So it was a late game. One thing that I wanted to bring up, New Haven plays Leo at Leo after this DeKalb game. So they're going to have some games coming up on hand that are really going to be pivotal games to set up that conference race.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's nice to see, I mean, just generally speaking, especially in a place like the NE8, I mean, we've talked about it. Seems like for the last couple of years, New Haven rising to the occasion. You have the playmakers. Now we're only 2 games in. There's a long way to go. Last 5 years, they've only won 5 games. But I mean, very convincing in the first couple of weeks for the New Haven Bulldogs and their defeat. I think DeKalb is a team on the rise. I think the key for them has been finding a quarterback. They had Tegan Irk for a couple of years, who I think broke all kinds of records.
Right.
Now enter Aiden Lytle, who kind of played the backup role to Tegan Irk. And I think with Seth Wilcox finding that quarterback, I think that's kind of a good starting point for the Barons as they go forward. And it should be a fun one on Friday night in New Haven, one of the top games in the NE8, and as they start to really push into conference play as well in the NE8.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're, kind of working here now in this segment, talking about some of these recaps of some of these games. And, New Haven beats Lures handedly 36-7, which a little surprised by that. I think Lures is facing the same question that they face about every other year is, they have these classes that rise up and then they graduate. And it's in, the turnover aspect of things. But like you said, New Haven's a team that if they have consistency in how they play, and the first 2 weeks they've shown that, then I think they're definitely a team to look out for because they got all the talent they need on the field for them to have a good year and maybe even have a good postseason. But it's going to come down to consistency. Can they continue to do this week in, week out, and get the quarterback play, all those things?
Yeah, New Haven with another big victory over Bishop Lures Friday night, 36-7, 286 rush yards as a team. We talked about the weapons. Donovan Williams, 80 yards and a touchdown and a rushing touchdown. Mylan Graham's 55 yards. but Adrian Anderson, 120 rush yards. So just as soon as we start talking about James Hardy IV and Mylan Graham and Johnny Washington and Donovan Williams and Trey Bates, enter Anderson, and just another weapon. The defense too, fumble return for a touchdown and a safety. The New Haven defense scored 8 points. Lures offense scored 7. So more points for the New Haven defense than Lures had last night. That is a telling sign for really both of those programs, to say the least. Moving on to some of the other games that we had over the weekend, Coach, and we'll kind of breeze through some of these games. Concordia and Eastbrook out of Marion. Marion takes care of business. Another big performance from Gavin Engel, their running back, 225 yards and 4 touchdowns. He's now had 7 in the first 2 weeks. But for Concordia, a bright spot is their quarterback play. They played a different quarterback this week, Carter Ripke, 23 for 38, 406 yards and 3 touchdowns. So they're really they've got some players. It's just really mind-blowing to me when you see a team like Concordia throw for 406 yards and different receivers, and boy, they really are struggling. It's definitely the defense, I got to think.
Yeah, and that's kind of been the last couple of years thing. 1 year the defense is so solid that the offense is really not there, and vice versa. So it shows you now that their offense is really going to have to win them games as they move forward. Tim Manigault, good offensive coach, always has been, knows how to put his players in the best possible position to have success. Now, if he made the change for the sake of change or whether there was an injury, week 1, we don't know. But for a kid to come in and throw for 400 yards and have a high completion percentage like he did, that tells you right there that they've got some guys offensively. And I think Tim's one of the better coaches of understanding that he has to get the ball in and out of the hands of the quarterback quickly. So that's where their quick passing game has always been a big help for them, screens and things of that nature. So, they'll find their victory at some point this year, putting it all together.
Yeah.
So we'll have to wait and see how that goes with them.
And that's a team that benefits from being in the B division. I think they have.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where, obviously a team like Southside or something like that. I mean, maybe that Lures matchup later in the year, not having the schedule right in front of me to know who all they're playing. But I mean, I think there are some bright spots, and I think it's just, wow. I mean, they to put up those numbers and then take it on the chin. Moving down the list, the 2 North teams, we had Fort Wayne Northside versus Lawrence North. The Legends travel down to Indianapolis and fall to the Wildcats of Lawrence North, 35-13. The Legends now sitting at 0-2, Coach. A little bit better running game performance. They kind of did it running back by committee, 146 yards on the ground. Dylan Scheibel, 214 yards through the air, 11 for 18. Most of those to Malik Moore, a freshman. So and then also Jamari Pearson had 95 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I think it looked like they kind of really shook things up a little bit after that week 1. They come into week 2, but kind of the same result there, Coach.
Yeah, they were down 14-7 at half. A scoreless third quarter, so they're only down 7 heading into the fourth quarter, and Lawrence North had some big plays. They had an 85-yard touchdown run. It was the backbreaker because that put them up 21-7, and then that kind of was the snowball that they needed to get rolling Lawrence North. So another tough loss. Scheibel's getting more comfortable, as you can see. So now they get into conference play. Now they'll get to see where they stack up. They play Concordia in 2 weeks, so it'll be interesting to see how they progress from here moving forward with who they've played talent-wise in terms of good teams and how they go into the conference play.
Absolutely. Moving down, this game was not a conference game, but they both it counts in the regular season. Wayne and Northrop. Wayne takes it real easily there and gets past Northrop. Another strong showing for that team. 42-7 over Northrop. Kamar Nelson had a big night, 177 yards and 2 touchdowns. Harold Mack, 109 yards receiving. Marcus Cooper, who 2 weeks in a row now is really starting to make a name for himself as the new quarterback of the Wayne Generals, 13 for 16, 184 yards, 2 passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown. This Wayne team, we keep talking about it. I mean, They are proving so far, to put their money where their mouth is. I mean, really.
Well, and you're right with all that, they get the huge win, like we said, week 1 against Addicts. They come right back, hold Northrop to 7 points. So it shows you defensively that they're doing good things. And so far, Sherwood just concentrating on defense and letting his son take over the offense has been the right recipe for them. And like you said, they're getting productive play. Cooper as the quarterback has done well. They've got some weapons too. The wide receiver I think he's only a sophomore. Is it Mack, Harold Mack?
Yeah.
He's got an offer in the Mack, but he's a young pup in that regard. So you're right. I think with Wayne, they're a team that people are going to have to be cautious of as the year moves on, even though we're in that 2-divisional type of deal, because I think they play, let's see here. After this one, they got Homestead this week, which will be a good measuring stick for them.
Yeah.
Homestead, they're just struggling right now with the young offense as they are. And then after that one, Wayne goes to Lures. They got Southside, and then they play Carroll the latter part of September. And they play Snyder the last game of the year, I believe, which could be essentially for everything.
Yeah.
Because it all depends on what all transpires. But I think we both are pretty excited to see Wayne and how they progress this year because they've got it rolling.
Yeah, absolutely. So that should be a good one at Homestead. I know that will be one of the top games in the area. So looking forward to that on Friday. Now these next 3, Coach, we could almost kind of lump together or however we want to break down, but Homestead's loss to Archbishop Moeller out of Cincinnati, Dwanger's loss to Archbishop Moeller, 57-0. Homestead loses on the road to Noblesville, 42-0. Southside loses at home, 41-3. So those 3 games, not a lot of offensive output from the Fort Wayne SAC schools. Really took it on the chin for all 3 of those teams, particularly Dwanger and Homestead.
Well, the one thing about the Homestead, the Carmel game, as exciting as it was, and unfortunately, a loss with them, Carmel gives up like 55 to a team out of Missouri on Friday night. So now you go, oh, okay. That wasn't maybe a great measuring stick for Homestead in that 7-point loss. And then they, Noblesville really puts it on them. They gave up 379 yards total offense, but 346 rushing. That right there is crazy for Homestead. They got manhandled. I mean, that's the only way you can put it. They got manhandled by Noblesville. Now, Noblesville traditionally has a big, strong football team. They haven't been a team that has been very predominant down there over the last few years, but they showed it against Homestead. And then, of course, what do you do with Dwanger? You go to Moeller. Moeller's a nationally known program. They just gotten beat by Ben Davis in their own backyard. Here comes Dwanger, So they had a lot of things on their mind, and unfortunately, Dwenger ran into a freight train on Friday night with that one.
Yeah, Noblesville versus Homestead, 350 rushing yards. And then Moeller out of Cincinnati, 444 total against Dwenger. Scores by quarter for the Archbishop Moeller Crusaders. 20 points in the first half, or first quarter, 22 in the second, 9 and 6. So, I mean, this one they got up early. It was out of hand early, and it was 4 turnovers for the Bishop Dwenger Saints, 3 lost fumbles and an interception and just 53 rush yards. Just nothing going for the Saints on Friday.
And they played 2 really tough games. Probably the toughest of everybody in Fort Wayne. Bishop Dwenger has played Brownsburg, perennial power, and Moeller, a perennial power, back to back. So I would caution everybody that the wheels may look like they're falling off over at Bishop Dwenger because of the scores and things of that nature. But just remember, they played 2 predominantly powered teams, and that doesn't necessarily mean anything going forward because everything's in front of Bishop Dwenger.
Yep, and that's exactly why they schedule the opponents that they do in that non-conference slate. Well, that takes us through week 2 now, Coach, and we'll move on to kind of week 3. We call it kind of moving the chains, if you will, and we'll pop up the games for this Friday night in the SAC, and with the remaining time, we'll kind of go through them. We first right off the bat, if we go left to right, up to down, Northside and Dwenger, meaning 2 0-2 teams, 2 teams that have not gotten off to the best start, probably not start, especially for Northside, start that they really had hoped. One of these 2 teams is going to come out with a win, Coach, but always a fun one. I know Northside picked up the win last year. That kind of catapulted them into their memorable season. This should be a fun one out at Shields Field.
Yeah, and you hate to say, this is a critical game only being in week 3 of the season, but for these 2 teams, it is because, like you said, both have not won as of yet. They had a dandy of a game a year ago. This is going to be an interesting game this year. I think Northside, like I said, that week 1 game against Northridge, we said it. I said it in the pregame show. You can't go to sleep on a team like that because they're really good, and they showed why. And I think they caught Northside in that game. I think they really caught Northside in that game. So this one's going to be a dandy, like you said. Tay Johnson's got to come out and be the man. He's got to be the guy that's all over the field making plays and doing things. Pearson's got to continue doing what he does. And then on Dwenger's side of the coin, defensively, they got to shore some things up. And then, Carter Minnick's the kid that we haven't heard as much of yet, but I think his name will start popping into the fray. So that one, like you said, good game.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot to play for, obviously, as we enter in the SAC. So all these teams are 0-0 in conference. So this is where it really will bear out. The other, if we go next door, the other Bishop Lures, traveling to Northrop. 2 teams reeling in their own way. Northrop has been long a team that has struggled to find its footing the last 5 or 6 years. Lures just really surprising in some respects. Maybe not that they lost to East Noble and all of that, but the fact that how bad it was. And so where does this team sit? And is this going to be a team that really is a player in the SAC this season in the Lures Knights?
This game to me, I don't know. I mean, I just don't have a good feel on either one of them as it pertains to who they are and the identity that they are. Of course, Northrop is still in a transitional phase, even though it's year 2. And then Bishop Lures has taken on the chin for the last 2 weeks offensively. Again, I'm not sure what they are because, of who they've played. And so, I give the edge to Bishop Lures from the standpoint of a more established program. And this gives them a chance to get on the right track. But a team like Northrop, this could be the game that catapults them, like we said before, that gets the train moving forward if they could get a big victory against Lures.
Yeah, it would be curious to see how things play out when you get to that fourth quarter, how close of a game that is, because that can make a difference. And a team like Lures that has been there before can close out games, whereas a team like Northrop doesn't have that experience. I mean, all hypothetical to say the least, but at the same time, it should be an interesting one out at Spooler Stadium. Moving down the list, we have the two cursive names on our Snyder and Concordia out at Zollner Stadium. Snyder, we talked about it, has looked really good off the bat. They've risen to number 1 in the Class 5A polls. Concordia shown flashes of brilliance on the stat lines. That has not paid off in the win column. I think Snyder probably has another good matchup for them this week, especially that secondary. We might see a lot of stats coming out of those guys.
Well, we talked about this prior to the year starting, that Concordia had a kind of a very tough road to haul with their early schedule on who they played and who they got right at one after the other. I think the only thing with Snyder is, can they keep up the consistency that they've shown the first 2 weeks offensively and defensively? I guarantee it. Coach Tittman is worried defensively with the throwing ability of Concordia and whether or not that's going to put a stress on their secondary. And again, remember, 2 years ago, that was their biggest Achilles heel, was their secondary for Snyder. Now they've gotten themselves where they've got darn good coverage guys. They got a 7-man front that's right now that's playing lights out. So this is the type of game you don't give Concordia a chance. You get up, get on them, and you start putting guys in as it pertains to that second half once you do that. If they cannot give Concordia hope. If they give them hope, they're in for a dogfight.
Absolutely. Moving over to the other side, we have Carroll at Southside. Southside, promising summer we talked about. The first 2 weeks, they had a close win or loss, I should say, to Marion, where they had a chance to win in the final minute. And then Friday night against South Bend St. Joseph's, just blown out at home in their home opener on the new turf. At home again this week at Jack Weicker Stadium at Southside. Carroll comes in. I think the Archers are probably overmatched here, Coach. In fact, I won't even say, I'll drop the probably. It's going to be a long night for them.
Well, yeah, and here's what I would say, though. South Bend St. Joe, again, predominantly well-traditioned football program up there in South Bend. So it wasn't something that was a surprise to see in that regard. You're right. Carroll, on paper, no question, they should be the better team and control this from start to finish. Carroll's got to find themselves a way to find a running game against Southside. That's what they've got to do in their mindset. And I would imagine Coach Dinan is going to do that. He's going to find a way to get themselves running the football, getting Starks running it, and get themselves going, because that's what they're going to need moving forward, because they've got what they need defensively. It's just a matter of getting what they need offensively, is running the football better.
Yeah, absolutely. And penalties too. The discipline. Southside, 11 penalties for 104 yards. That doesn't help you at all any. And it's the young team, the discipline and all of that, and a discipline that Carroll has, but we saw that at times too, the false starts when you're getting into the red zone and all of that. So early stuff to clean up, but that one, part of the start, as part of the crossover weeks in week 3, because these are all big schools versus small schools, so to speak, Division A versus Division B. So that's why you see these matchups. They all play out in the SAC standings, but definitely, have different ramifications for both sides of that conference. And the fifth and final game on the SAC slate, Coach, probably the game of the night. That's kind of why I put it in the center of the graphic here. Homestead at Wayne. Homestead 0-2, really challenging schedule. Wayne, they've kind of lived up to the hype so far, I think you could say. And this should be a fun one. This could be that breakout moment for the Wayne Generals, to welcome Homestead in, give themselves a shot. And this is really to see where they really are when it comes into the conference fold, the Wayne Generals, and really Homestead, how much of it was playing that hard schedule.
Well, and absolutely correct in that analysis there, dude. And the other thing is that when these teams get together for whatever reason, it's always a shootout. It's like where'd the defense go, because it's a 50-50 game, 50 to 55 type of game. But Wayne, I think right now is thinking, hey, we got a shot to get off on the right foot in the Summit Athletic Conference coming in at 2-0, and Homestead licking some wounds from that game against Noblesville. They've got with that young quarterback and offense in general, right now they're kind of a little bit identity crisis for them offensively in that regard. So definitely one of the top games in the Summit Athletic Conference this week, and a game that I'm looking forward to see how it plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. That score from a year ago, Homestead wins 61-54. So
Yeah.
it looked more like a basketball score. So
Right.
yeah, that kind of takes us through week 3 and the upcoming games these Friday night, and obviously kind of takes us towards the end of our show. We're looking for another good Friday night. I know we'll have the 1380 game of the week that our friends Brett and his crew will be announcing later in the week, all the details on that. We will have the pregame show starting at 6 o'clock on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM. And then Shannon and Rump and Brett will be up in the booth for the call of the game. And then afterwards, the post-game show at the Pizza Hut in the area. Like I said, they'll have all the details on that on 1380thefan.com and, of course, on the Sports Rush all week long, too. So, Coach, I think about that time, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. It's about that
all right.
time.
Well, safe travels to you. I know you're out in North Carolina. There is the hurricane ramifications for there. Hopefully, safe travels for you. Hopefully, you get back in time for Friday night football action. And for Shannon Griffith, the coach, I'm Eric Dutkiewicz, Doot. This has been Upon Further Review, and we'll see you Friday night at the football games across the area. I think it stopped.